Victor, who is this woman in my kitchen?
Helen, keep your voice down. This is Lagos, not the village.
You must be the ex. He told me about you. The ex. Victor, tell her who paid for this kitchen. Tell her who paid for these tiles. Tell her whose mother's land was sold so this house could have a foundation.
Helen, do not do this here.
I am not doing anything, Victor. I am simply standing in my house. The question is, what is she doing in it?
The land had belonged to her mother for 31 years. It sat on the edge of Enugu, a modest plot with red earth and a small mango tree that had given fruit every season without fail. Helen had grown up watching her mother tend that land like a living thing, watering it, protecting it, promising that one day it would mean something important for the family. When her mother pressed the document into Helen's hands the morning before the sale, she did not cry. She simply held Helen's face between her palms and said, "Use it well, my daughter. Use it for something that will last." Helen used it for Victor. She had known Victor for 3 years by then. 3 years of his brilliance and his hunger and his plans that filled every room he walked into. Victor could talk about business the way a preacher talks about heaven, with total certainty, complete fire, and the ability to make everyone around him believe arrival was only a matter of time. Helen believed. She believed so completely that she took her mother's land, signed the papers in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning, and walked out with enough money to change both their lives. She did not tell Victor how much the land had meant. She did not want him to carry the weight of it. She simply placed the money in front of their future and said, "Let us begin." They moved to Lagos 6 weeks later with 2 suitcases, a rented truck, and a business plan Victor had rewritten 4 times on the overnight bus. Helen had already researched the market, contacted 2 suppliers, and found them a small apartment in Surulere that was clean, affordable, and close enough to the trade routes Victor needed. While Victor made calls and attended meetings and worked the room at every introduction, Helen sat behind the numbers. She tracked every naira that came in and every naira that went out. She built the spreadsheets, chased the invoices, negotiated with the clearing agents at the port, and learned customs regulations from a borrowed textbook she read in the evenings after cooking and cleaning and preparing everything Victor would need for the following day. Nobody saw Helen. That was fine. Helen was not doing it to be seen. She was doing it because she believed in what they were building, and because somewhere in the architecture of her love for Victor, she had decided that his success and her success were the same thing. They were one. What he built, she built. What he became, she helped create. The business grew slowly at first and then all at once in the way that businesses built on real foundations tend to grow. By the 3rd year, they had moved from Surulere to a proper office in Ikeja. By the 4th year, they had their first major contract with a retail chain that needed consistent importation of industrial goods. By the 5th year, Victor's name was in conversations Helen was not invited to, business dinners she was not attending. Heard about afterward. Industry events where Victor accepted handshakes and praise, while Helen sat at home reconciling accounts. She noticed the distance before she could name it. It came in small ways. Victor stopping mid-conversation to take calls he walked away to receive. Victor coming home later and later with explanations that were complete but felt somehow hollow. Victor looking at her across the dinner table with an expression she had never seen before. Not love exactly, not contempt exactly, but something uncomfortably close to assessment. As though he were measuring her against a standard she did not know existed and finding her just slightly short. One evening, he sat down beside her and said the words so carefully it was clear he had rehearsed them. He said the business was entering a new phase. He said the people around him needed to reflect where he was going, not where he had come from. He said Helen was a good woman. He wanted her to know he meant that sincerely, but that good was not always enough. The world he was moving into required a different kind of presence, a different kind of woman beside him. Helen sat very quietly. She asked him once to repeat what he had just said. He did. She nodded slowly, stood up, went to the kitchen, and finished washing the dishes she had left soaking. She did not cry until she was in the bathroom with the shower running, and even then she pressed both hands against the tiles and made herself breathe through it, because she had learned long ago that falling apart was a luxury she could rarely afford. She did not leave, not yet. She needed to understand the full shape of what was happening before she made a single move. Helen had always been careful that way, not from weakness, but from the kind of patience that only comes from watching your mother tend land for 30 years, and understanding that what you plant in the right season and the right way will always outlast what is grabbed in haste. She began to pay attention differently. She started noticing the charges on the business account that did not correspond to any supplier or vendor she recognized. She started noticing a name, Tara, appearing in Victor's phone notifications with a frequency that told its own story. She started noticing that Victor had begun to dress with a new kind of care on evenings he claimed were work events, and that he smelled different when he came home, not of sweat and Lagos traffic, but of something lighter, something deliberate, something that was not for her. It took Helen 4 weeks to confirm what was happening. She already knew. She did not confront him. She did not reach or weep or throw his clothes into the corridor. She simply sat with the knowledge, the way you sit with a diagnosis, steadily, seriously, making a plan. She called her lawyer on a Wednesday morning from a payphone 3 streets from the office. She had chosen this lawyer herself 2 years earlier during a routine business review and had kept the relationship quietly maintained ever since. The lawyer's name was Mrs. Adeze Obi, a compact, precise woman from Anambra who wore reading glasses on a chain and did not waste words. Helen explained everything. Mrs. Obi listened without interrupting. When Helen finished, Mrs. Obi said, "Good, you kept records. Then we have everything we need." What Victor did not know, what he had never bothered to learn because the details of the foundation had never interested him the way the height of the building did, was that Helen's name was on everything. The property in Lekki that Victor now called home and had begun to furnish with Tara's taste was registered in both their names, with Helen listed as primary holder. The original business registration listed Helen as a director. The first major loan that had allowed them to scale, the one Helen had secured using her own personal guarantee because Victor's credit history was not yet strong enough, was still legally tied to her signature. Helen had not planned this as a weapon. She had done it because she was thorough, because she believed in protecting what they built together, because it had never occurred to her that protection would one day need to run in only one direction. She spent the next 6 weeks moving quietly and completely. She worked with Mrs. Obi to document every financial contribution she had made from the beginning: the land sale, the startup capital, the loan guarantee, the years of unpaid operational management. She transferred certain assets through entirely legal processes that Mrs. Obi executed with clean precision. She opened a personal account that Victor knew nothing about and began directing her own independent consultancy income. She had started doing independent procurement work for 2 other companies, something Victor had called a distraction, into it every month. She said nothing. She showed nothing. She continued cooking, continued going to the office, continued smiling at the right moment. Then one afternoon, she came home early and found Tara in her kitchen. Tara was tall and polished and wore her confidence like expensive fabric, easily, without effort, as though it had been tailored specifically for her. She was leaning against the marble counter that Helen had chosen and paid for in the kitchen of the house that Helen's mother's land had helped build, smiling at Helen with the particular smile of a woman who believes she has already won. Victor stood between them, looking like a man who had rehearsed for a scene and forgotten every line. Helen did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She stood in the doorway and asked her questions calmly. And when Victor told her not to embarrass herself, something settled in her chest. Something final and clean, like a door closing on a room she would never need to enter again. She left the house that evening with 2 bags and her laptop. She called no one. She posted nothing. She simply disappeared into the city the way water disappears into dry ground, completely, quietly, leaving no trace on the surface. Victor did not take it seriously at first. He called twice, sent 3 messages, and when Helen did not respond, he assumed she was performing the ritual of wounded wives, the temporary withdrawal that ends with return and renegotiation. He went back to Tara. He went back to his plans. He went back to the business of being Victor. He discovered the reality in pieces. The first piece came when he tried to refinance the Lekki property to raise capital for a new contract. The bank manager called him into an office and explained with professional patience that the primary account holder had placed a legal notification on the property that required her written consent before any financial instrument could be secured. Against it, Victor sat in that chair for a long time after the manager finished speaking. The second piece came when 2 of his suppliers, women Helen had originally introduced him to, women who had trusted the business because they trusted Helen, quietly withdrew their terms and began rerouting their contracts. They did not explain. They did not need to. The third piece came when the business registration documents needed renewal and the filing office flagged that a directorship dispute had been formally lodged and would need to be resolved before any changes could be processed. Victor called Helen. She did not answer. He called Mrs. Obi's office by accident, not knowing Helen had listed hers as her contact address for legal correspondence. Mrs. Obi's assistant answered and told him very politely that all communication regarding the matter should be submitted in writing. Tara lasted 4 more months. She was a practical woman, and practical women do not stay in houses that are legally complicated and financially shrinking. She left on a Sunday with her things in 3 trips and did not leave a note. Victor's world contracted steadily after that. Not dramatically. There was no single collapse, no public scandal, no moment that could be pointed to and called the fall. It simply became smaller and thinner and harder, until the version of himself he had imagined, the man who had outgrown Helen, who had risen past her usefulness, who deserved something newer and shinier, became impossible to locate in any mirror he looked into. He came to her on a Thursday evening 14 months after she had walked out of that kitchen. He had lost weight. His agbada was still good quality, but it sat on him differently now, like clothes chosen for a man he used to be. He arrived at the address he had gotten from a mutual contact and stood outside until Helen's neighbor let him into the compound. Helen received him in her sitting room. She offered him water. She sat across from him with her hands folded and her face completely composed. Victor spoke for a long time. He used words like mistake and clarity and realization. He talked about what he had lost and what he now understood. He said her name the way a man says the name of something he destroyed and cannot rebuild. He said he knew he did not deserve anything. He said he was only asking for a conversation, a chance, a door left even slightly open. Helen listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not cry. When he finished, she stood, walked to her small writing desk by the window, and came back with a business card. She placed it on the table in front of him. It was Mrs. Obi's card. Helen said, "Everything that needs to be resolved between us will be resolved through her. She is very good. She will treat you fairly." Then she walked to her front door and opened it. Victor sat for another moment looking at the card. Then he stood, straightened his agbada, and walked to the door. He paused in the doorway where Helen had once stood in a dusty pink blouse asking a question he had no honest answer to, and looked at her one final time. Helen looked back at him with the steady, unbroken eyes of a woman who had sold her mother's land for a foundation and then built herself an entirely different house on higher ground. She closed the door. Outside, the mango tree her mother used to tend was gone, but everything it was supposed to mean. The permanence, the provision, the fruit that came faithfully every season had found its way into Helen anyway. She had used it well. Was this story worth fighting for, or was she wrong to give him so much? Drop your answer in the comments. We want to hear from you. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.